recording the session so that we can have it for reference.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
I don't know if it'll pick up the audio since the audio is through the phone, but we'll give this thing a shot. All right, so let me do a quick bit of house cleaning here. And all right, so the agenda that I sent out was, I think it makes sense to start with a good overview just of the software setup, number of licenses, what we're working with, the optimal specs to get this program to work, because it's GPU heavy, which means that you really got to have a good video card, more so than a mega processor. I mean, it also helps if you have a good amount of RAM too. And going through, well, I'll share the experiences that I've had sort of tinkering with this and playing around with it and show a few examples. And I'll open the discussion up to the design team here about any of the best practices that we have for Enscape or visualization in general. So, oh wait, actually I need that back. So for a quick overview, there are 3 floating licenses firm-wide that are both for the Atlanta and DC offices. I mean, that's something that, yes, they're on the call. Both Kevin and Dan are on the call. And so this is going through how the licensing all works. And Tiffany sent out this key. Like, I can also send it out if you guys need it. This is how because with Enscape, you can just go to their website and download it. It'll start out as a trial version, and then you can copy and paste this key in, and it'll go to the full release.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so start with, some pretty pictures, because we're architects and that's what we all like. So this was done, this was a quick marketing effort done by Cowboy Partnership on East Elm and 10th Avenue. This is, rendered pretty quickly in Enscape with some quick post-production to bump up some of the brightness and also bring in some of the line work, and I guess that's kind of jumping ahead a little bit to modeling techniques, but with these reveal lines, those are actually just detail lines drawn in SketchUp. Enscape only renders 3D geometry, so what I did in this instance was I set up a view in SketchUp and exported the line work separately, and then layered that on in Photoshop. There's a little trickery you have to play with it, because the Enscape cameras and SketchUp cameras work a little bit differently. Like the perspective and horizon lines are different, so you kind of have to play with it. I'll walk through that quickly. And here's a night rendering. In this case, so there are two ways I played with doing night rendering. So I think in this case, you can say I've actually added light sources. And then there's also a case where you can give a material and illuminance and adjust the flip candles.
Can you do both?
You can do both, actually. I mean, you
can make a variation. Yeah, because this one is all sort of one uniform looking something. So you can change it to make it look realistic.
And then that's where, and I think a great thing about this tool is you can, so this is just a basic quick and dirty test, but for, what was it, the Jack's Harbor project, where you can actually see people and scenery, you can still do that layering in Photoshop. But this just gets you, the main reason I'm so excited about this program is this gets you a pretty good base quality without waiting hours or overnight. Like these renderings on my machine with my graphics card take about 10 or 15 minutes. With optimal graphics, like there are a few people, like, well, Stephen, for example, could do a rendering like this probably in about a minute or two.
Yeah. So the entourage can't be part of the rendering, it has to be overlaid with Photoshop or what?
Well, actually, not all this entourage is what's placed in the SketchUp model. I mean, just our normal technique that we do, placing the cars, the trees, and the people, and it just renders it like this.
So if you were to actually put people inside and all that, not go through Photoshop,
yeah.
can that be done also?
Yeah.
We also can animate it. That's something else we haven't got to yet, but.
Putting another layer over Photoshop and all, if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
I know the price might get bigger, but if there's a potential, that's something that you can consider.
Actually, that'd be great, and I think what would happen is, well, the Photoshop files, well, you're right, the SketchUp file would potentially get bigger. The Photoshop files would get smaller because you're adding fewer layers in Photoshop. And also, it would help with lighting because the people and all that would be lit the same as your scene, as opposed to...
That's the difference. If you add the contrast after you've done the rendered version, then the people are not in the same kind of light reflection and all of that too. So that might be another thing.
And so here's another example where this was actually mapped in SketchUp. And so we did a version of this with Maxwell where the storefront was actually layered in Photoshop. No, that was just straight out of SketchUp, just adjusting the time of day and playing with the shadow highlights a little
So you
bit.
didn't have to do any Photoshop on
Nope.
top of these? So these are there inside the SketchUp? I don't think so.
Oh, they were. It was just that in Maxwell, they rendered just as transparent, so they didn't show. I played with the materials. And
They are like all the three same.
So your storefront there is just painted from the paint bucket surface material, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And even things like Maxwell, I noticed when I rendered it in Maxwell, like that grub sign didn't appear, and I think that had to be stamped in Photoshop. But this was, the only Photoshopping done was just tweaking some shadows and highlights a bit, because I find Enscape can render a little bit heavy. It's just a simple toggle.
But all the interior, there's nothing in Photo. It was not a model, right? It was still an image.
Yeah.
Photoshop.
Just a dummy, like a billboard image placed behind it.
Yeah. And so you have different shots, like in this case, that water, that was actually, we have a SketchUp components that have these sprays. No, this is Heinz. This is a Heinz OKC. And what I really like is that it gets some really good reflectivity in here. Like this is the cupped metal tile. I think actually we use a similar product on Arsenal. It's the same Pat-Clad precision tile series. It's just cupped, whereas with Arsenal we use flat.
Is that the black color or what are you doing?
Yeah, in this case, it's, well, what's a little harder to render is the intent was that it'd be like a gradient wave, like different shades of black to mimic the iron spot brick.
Those are tough to get it. I don't know what program.
From far, it looks like asphalt. You know, like almost like tar, you know, black. So it doesn't really have the richness of that metal material that you're gonna do.
Hey Brandon, or Steve either. In the actual program, can you apply reflectivity options onto any SketchUp material, and how does that work?
Well, actually, you can jump right into that. So this is I use this SketchUp model as a demo. This is what we did for Landmark in Tuscaloosa. And so it's just as simple as, well, starting Enscape, and what Enscape is doing is it builds a proxy version of the SketchUp model. And so Enscape is set up to where you can send this as a standalone executable. And you could either do it on a standalone executable where you don't need Enscape to open it, like let's say you're taking it to a client's location, or it also has functionality on a web browser. They have their own servers that you can just give the client a link and they can open it and walk around in the model.
Got it.
So you can see, so there's the actual rendered environment. What I've done to get a true one-to-one is the aspect ratio of the window is how that image will, or it's how it'll export. And so I get it to kind of match the proportion of the SketchUp window. And then, so now, let me open up my Enscape. So I'll open up the options dialog so you can kind of see how or where some of the settings are to tinker around with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, so you can play with depth of field like photography, like have with the different layers of focusing and blurred out. You say, oh, that's more focused and that becomes blurred out. And so
Yeah.
that's a feature I found hard to pull off, but that could just take more playing around. It could add a very nice effect. Something for it. You can adjust exposure.
Right.
Brightness, field of view, how wide of an angle your camera is.
Right.
Oh,
I'm kind of impressed that this Cracker Jack box computer actually runs that.
yeah.
I mean, aren't you?
I mean, I actually am impressed too because
That doesn't
sound like it's gonna fully take off.
Yeah.
It's not like.
and so what I did was I turned on some of the on-screen tips. So
Perfect.
So right now it's in the fly-through mode, but it actually, oh, and a funny little thing, you can see, oh,
animation.
yeah, you can do walkthroughs. And I apologize, because this computer isn't quite set up like our design studio computers, it's a little bit more laggy than usual.
That's
But I
fine.
was trying to show you. This is a little bit of being funny. You can see there's SketchUp Brandon on the corner penthouse apartment that I could never afford in real life, but I could dream.
Pretty cool, man.
But the navigation actually works kind of like a gaming engine. You can do WASD to actually move, or use
Right.
the up-down arrow keys to move back and forth.
Right.
You know what I'll do is widen that field of view a little bit so that when I'm in walk mode, because walk mode will stick you on any modeled plane, but because I didn't quite model the plane that extensively, it drops off.
Correct.
Right.
One other thing which may not be related to this, okay, the materials that when you guys apply the brick and all that, it's probably like a tile, right? You take the tile and apply it, so if you see from distance, it really looks like panels rather than brick, Is that something that can be avoided, or what does one do in a case? Because many other renderings that I see before and I've got to
Oh, you're talking about like the tiling effect, how it's not truly randomized like a real brick.
Sample of the material when you're applying it to a mixed surface, so it's a repetitive tile, but when you see it from a distance, it seems like statues, not a continuous brick.
And that's, we can get a broader, seamless texture that is a
But
larger
it's still
scale.
going to be a tile.
But I think the best thing, I think it's a combination, like Stephen mentioned, getting a potentially bigger tile, and also, or what I've done to try and solve that problem that helps sometimes is because bricks are random, it's where you cut that tiling so that when they stitch together, it reads correctly. Like you don't have a line that just suddenly jumps and shifts up where it's not supposed to. I think that's where your eye really sees that it's just stamped 20 times across the facade.
Merge is nice with it, so the transition is one that
Right.
But if you make a larger tile, does it have an impact on the resolution?
Well, we're going to get that near the end, but yes. But we have a tool, a plugin for SketchUp that you can go in there and see what the resolution is, and we can reduce it and save time on that.
So then you do a big plugin.
Right. And I could share some sources for these with everyone so that where they have larger scale, seamless textures and smaller scale seamless textures. That's
There's
great.
a couple of the sites that I use to do it.
Thing about SketchUp too, you can have one break and just change the color a lot of the times. If you have one, and Haley was even saying you make it black and white and just add the color in.
So that there's no variation of the color, so you don't have that shadow line that's
Yeah.
breaking up and making it look like four long lines. If you just fill that in Photoshop and re-export that in, you won't have, everything will be just one flat color.
And so another thing to really note about Enscape is its live responsiveness, and I'll do it side by side to kind of, or just to illustrate that. Let me close this. So, and this might be a dangerous tool for Venki to see, but I think it's pretty good, or Venki and Dean to see. Like if Venki's to come, or wanted was to say, well, Brandon, I want to make this larger, you can pull that out, and it will update your rendering live.
There you go. We were just going to ask that question, Brandon. You beat us to it.
Just like that. And it's like, this is a concrete building, so it's possible. Structural engineer will kill us, but well.
Why did you tell me, Brandon?
Cover his eyes.
Don't look here.
That works, like you can not only change the geometry, but
It pretty much can do anything.
yeah, you can change it, or the texture, yep. Texture, materials.
Can you actually change the view in SketchUp and have that live sync, or is it just actually affecting the physical model?
Well, so are you asking, well, can you sync the camera position between between Enscape and SketchUp?
Yeah, like when you orbit in SketchUp space, will it also orbit the same fashion in Enscape space?
Well, it can. You can. Right now, that setting is disabled, so I guess I've been rotating this camera.
Correct.
It doesn't affect the SketchUp model, but you can, however, like if I go back to repositioning this camera as it's set up,
right.
if I click this guy to synchronize the view, it will, it will kind of, or somewhat match. The issue is that, like I said, is that you notice how this view line is much higher than the SketchUp model. Or low, yeah. And that comes back to with SketchUp, with this, you can see how 2-point perspective is on. If I use the hand tool, you can actually shift it up and down and it doesn't change the perspective. But
correct.
Enscape works, I guess Enscape is a little bit more literal. So if I were to actually like shift this up,
yeah,
perspective actually changes, which is what it would do in real life. But that gets into how it's a little bit challenging to sync cameras. But I think that's a good segue into the workflow, and which I can show real quick if everyone's ready.
Yeah.
So that matching cameras is only for, live, right? When you want it live.
Yes.
Otherwise, it doesn't really match.
You can match a scene. You can match a saved scene in SketchUp, which.
Mm-hmm. And you can also like send that view, if you really found a great one, send it back to SketchUp,
Yeah.
save it in the SketchUp file. So when you open it back up,
Oh, okay.
it works both ways. It works both ways.
So like in this case, I'm having to get used to slight lag. It's not quite moving. Oh, the other thing too is, is that the perspective is actually locked based on the 2-point perspective in the SketchUp model. I'm going to desynchronize that so that it'll look right in Enscape. And the other thing about 2-point perspective in Enscape is that it's another setting. So right now, it's architectural 2-point perspective is checked. If you uncheck that setting, it doesn't do the 2-point perspective. You start getting that third vertical vanishing point.
Right, yeah.
Right, the fisheye kind of.
Yes. And that's also affected by your field of view. Just like a wide angle lens, the higher this is, the more that distorts.
Right.
Distorts, yeah.
All right, so now, and so in the capture settings, this is where I have it set to, or you can have it set to window. Window is literally the size of this Enscape window that we're looking at. Custom is, so custom, I have it bumped up at the highest resolution. I'll probably cut that in half because I don't want to tempt fate with this computer. And the other important thing to remember is, well, to use aspect ratio. That's the aspect ratio of the SketchUp model. So that way, it'll automatically update this based on what you enter here. And so the other thing too that Stephen J and I were talking about is this setting. If you were to export material ID and depth channels, that gets you all the different selection filters like a Maxwell, where you can export selecting by material, by object. And you can auto name. I don't use that. I like naming my own stuff. So but where we want to go? Do we want to go a little bit nighttime? No, let's go day.
Or you can do it like a full day or whatever, the sun you can see out.
Animate that, yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Okay, thanks to, especially if these are good for the courtyards and all that, they keep
Yeah.
generating the shadow study. That will really help you to know what's happening with the courtyard.
And then to do the night renderings, it actually will adjust the sky. I mean, well, for night renderings, I find that I have to do different settings for time of days. Like, so that's where you have to bump up the exposure because everything is black. And you can save those. And so all of these settings that we've been playing with, you can save them with this guy and come back and pick them. I haven't found a way to be able to share them from computer to computer. It kind of seems like whoever they're based on whichever computer was rendering, or person to person. But I think it's definitely helpful moving from project to project. And so let me bring this guy back into daylight.
Is the lighting fixed to north in SketchUp, or can you move the location of the sun?
I think it's tied to.
It is. It's tied to the model.
Yeah, it's tied to the model. It's tied to.
Okay.
If you change it in SketchUp, it updates. Yeah. So you just rotate forward, you know.
And so the other thing too, you can set up hotkeys to automatically export, or you can come up here, export that image. Let me go to my Enscape workshop.
You can't add
So
another.
what I do is I save a JPEG out of it and see how well it does. Well,
Like, oh man.
well, so while it's thinking, I can also kind of, or just, there it goes. As you can see how it's not like, and the funny thing is there are programs that I find will kind of fake you out with that. It'll take you to the end and say, oh, that was just stage one. No, once it gets to the end, it'll be done and exported.
And the length of time is a function of that resolution.
Yeah.
So the lower the resolution, obviously, you know, you're taking the time down considerably. So if you get in a bind, you can just, you know, render around 3,600 or pixels wide and use that.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen's exactly right. It's a function of, well, resolution and also graphics capability. And so it saves that image.
The streets and all that, is there something which can continue to do something there? They all look model. Model. Let's do it in the model.
Yeah, you could, so that actually brings up another good
If you
point.
want to put favors on them, you can put it in a model.
detail.
And you can add that, and you can also, let me see if I can find it. So you can also kind of compensate for how it may read in Enscape itself. And that's based on that selection. Actually, let me see if I can use that paint bucket tool. I'm glad it brought it back. My challenge is that, well, when I go to a different computer, everything's set up a little bit differently. Hotkeys aren't quite the same. So if you select that material, it's now highlighted in Enscape. And, okay, there we go. Move that out of the way. So you can change how it actually reads, I guess you could. It does, oh, there it goes. And so you can adjust how it actually reads if you want it to read a wet day. Yeah.
Really, you could
Snowy
export
day.
that 2 times, like wet and rough, and then Photoshop, make puddles.
And so what you can do, so or the process that I found successful is that you set up your materials in SketchUp. You do a test rendering in Enscape, and then some things, like I find the sidewalk for some reason reads like it was an icy day. So I'm gonna dial that back with these tools and export and then once I have the view the way that I like, I export it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I don't believe in this.
And so that's all stuff that you can forward, we can tweak on basically on site. Like you could come over and say, well, can you make that sidewalk a little darker? Sure, I'll brighten it up, it'll update it there.
Can you make all the grass to be more, it's all flat?
Oh, that's the other thing too, is that so Enscape actually has so it actually will render the grass or thickness to the grass. If I can find my
texture that has grass on it and it's horizontal, it creates a 3D front. And you can control how much. Right. And how much.
That's what I'm trying to show. If I can get back there we go. I can get back my SketchUp window. Like
Very low cut.
So you can do it.
That's the SketchUp, but not Enscape, it's just rendering what.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So Enscape, so say this is recognized as grass. You can actually classify things based on grass, based on if it's foliage, like if I select these plants, well, it's generic. I can change it to foliage, which affects the way lighting goes through it. So yeah, back to the original question about grass.
On there.
Yeah. But if you're trying to start PNG plants,
You can adjust the height of it, the variation. So let's just go crazy here, see if it'll look like a rainforest.
There you go.
Can you zoom in on the grass, Brandon?
Yeah,
how much it's like grown.
I can. Let me.
There you go.
Isn't that crazy?
There's some dimensions.
Sounds good. Like last study. Like reflector,
Yeah, I've had a couple of those.
I've had a hard time when I played with it. It's like, oh,
Okay, so
like here, I think it looks pretty flat.
what I'll actually do, because well, that kind of messed up a little bit of the second part of the demo, but that's
That's okay. Just want to know that.
Putting those in there, like Enscape. So you're saying use this glass for this, all those settings.
And yeah, it still saves it to the texture,
So what I'm going to do now is show the process of getting the line work to read in your final image. Because as you can see in the Enscape window, like none of the actual lines of the reveal render because they're not modeled.
They're not physically modeled, right?
So to try and save us some time, I'll re-export this scene at 3000. Because what I do is that once I get the still view that I want, then I can save that camera back into SketchUp, and then use the 2-point perspective in SketchUp and kind of, once you do that, because the horizon lines are different, the 2-point perspective in SketchUp will look low, but you can shift that up without distorting the perspective. And so it's just kind of, unfortunately, it's a little bit of eyeballing. You eyeball that it's in the same plane, and then you export it out and layer it in Photoshop. And so now we have that set. We can go back to here, create a camera view.
Have a preview panel.
And so it's kind of the reverse problem as an Enscape. It saves out as, or without the 2-point perspective. Now it's just a simple matter of, oh wait, I have to remember I don't have my shortcut. See if I can remember camera. 2-point perspective. Yay, I remembered. So I can just shift this up, and this doesn't have to be exact. I kind of shift it up to get enough line work in the model, because what you're going to do is just layer it on top to where it matches the rendered image. And so if you just miss a few lines in here, it's not that big a deal. And then
That's still an approximation process, it's not an accurate.
right.
But if you save a scene, then it will be accurate.
Yeah.
If you save it as a scene, it will match up.
Yeah, it will match up. The problem is that if I actually save this 2-point perspective, save it like this, and then recreate the rendering, then the Enscape won't match.
Yeah, so it kind of has to, your camera set in Enscape, you do an export, you send that view back to SketchUp, and you hit 2-point perspective, and if you just export the lines, you don't have to worry about the sky anyway, so you just have to drag it where the building is in the window and export it. And then you just kind of line up the 2 corners of the top of the building.
It's really, it's not.
I mean, we did that, we had to do that in Maxwell.
Now, Thea, which also has a live rendering, which I need to show you on my computer, you can actually just click in Thea and go
Scene is on.
Thea. And it does a live rendering and has the lines on it.
Okay, this is
I just want extra.
It's more, it takes longer to render than this one. This one's way faster. But it's, in my opinion, it's ahead of Maxwell. And it's cheaper than Maxwell. Why I got it for myself. Yeah, the quality,
I'm trying to find
it has, so it's a build upon Turkey Thea. And so it takes the best from Maxwell and the best from like V-Ray and combines them together. So you can pick the Maxwell type unbiased rendering, and it will take 6 hours to render. Or you can pick.
So I'll make this white line.
Ambient occlusion rendering, and it'll be done like this. It'll be
And
And it's all the channels and everything?
all the channels. Yeah.
so what I'm doing right now is I'm turning this line work to set it up for
Maybe
export.
something in the future to look at.
And in future, like normally I have a style set up for this that I can just switch to it, because this isn't mapped to my machine. I mean, I'm sort of improvising here. And then,
Hey, Brandon, do you have to turn off the trees too, or any of the actual photograph sort of things? Because those don't have a stroke, do they?
well, no, but, so to answer your question, I guess it depends. For me, I have to turn them off because in reality, you wouldn't see the lines of the window behind that tree anyway. And it's just a very subtle add to the line. I mean, you could if you really wanted to get more detailed, but I haven't really found the need to do that.
Okay.
Let me go to shadows. The key thing is I also want to turn off the, wait, I also want to turn off the sun, which for some reason, there we go. So now that this is roughly set up, I can export this.
So, the thinking that Maxwell is not going to
Yeah.
I think it may be good to just, compare.
Yeah, it could be good to
Do the
compare.
same view,
Yeah.
what and whatever
Right.
contrast is required, put it on there, see what the time. Then see the.
And so I make sure this resolution,
Significant enough, or is it very little, so it doesn't really matter.
We need it right now. I mean, that, there we go.
Yeah, I know, I understand that.
But it's
I-
like, you got a couple of days or tomorrow, and then you
Yeah.
just let it go overnight, come back to the Photoshop.
But it's good to evaluate the work.
I think it's definitely worth an evaluation. We're talking about, well, about the most optimal tool, Enscape or Maxwell. My opinion on that is for what I've seen of the general output we have from Maxwell, I don't see where it's that much superior to Enscape for the time that it takes to render. But
Let's take away the time. Time, we all know that looks like it's really, it's fantastic. But if the time is not a constraint, is there a merit to, based on the quality, is there a significant difference?
I think in that case, there's,
To me, I feel that Maxwell has a.
yeah, I would agree with that. Because especially when you go to Maxwell, like it's a more powerful rendering engine. It's more accurate with the lighting. You can get into more detail. That's like, for example, a renderer is probably not going to use Enscape for that final product.
It's probably two different applications, I see. It's more like talking to the client, showing, it's maybe that kind of
You need
application.
something at the end of the day,
Yeah.
might as well run it.
Rather than,
that.
Actual rendering for marketing images.
And also something that we're not using this for, but we could, is animation.
Yeah.
That's it.
I think
Because it renders so quick, like I've done Maxwell animations, and oh my goodness, it's so weak.
Yeah.
In this case, I might not be able to do the second part of the demo because I don't think this has Photoshop on it. But what I can at least show.
So you add this on Photoshop?
Yes.
Okay.
But what you have to remember is that the other thing with Enscape is the resolutions are different. So you'll have to go into the line drawing or into the line export in Photoshop and change that resolution to 72 and match the same pixel size so that when you bring it in, it's a one-to-one size. You can just slide it over, use the multiply map, and change the opacity.
I think with Maxwell, though, usually Maxwell you pay for it. That's it.
So that's pretty much Enscape, or in a nutshell. Other utilities I could show maybe when you guys are able to make it, we can have a more detailed review of some of the other stuff like walkthroughs and WebLink executables. Like we talked about being able to, you can create a Enscape model that you can then give a link to a client. They can go on the website and open that model and look around in it. They don't need Enscape. They don't need the high-powered hardware or anything.
Hey, Dan, did you guys figure out any schedule on Arsenal?
Now, you said you can have like a 3D view, right? That's without changing. That.
I lost you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, do you guys figured out Arsenal schedule or?
No, I mentioned that to Vinay, that you and I had talked, and we wanted to plan around kind of doing a little re-kickoff down in Atlanta, and he said he would get back to me. We've got a PM meeting Friday morning, so I'll bring that up again in that meeting, see if we can schedule something in, but I haven't done anything as far as dates or anything.
Yeah, definitely let's plan for that, based on that, so that, and I would also suggest if you want to stay another extra day to go through these kind of things, so that,
Yeah, no, he thought it was a great idea with regards to Arsenal, but certainly, it'd be great to get as much out of the trip as possible.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to, this is Steve and Dan, one thing that I wanted to just kind of mention is the, when you have issues with a SketchUp file being clunky or too slow, there's a couple, obviously there's the purge that's in the model info, but there's an extension that SketchUp makes called Material Resizer, and I can send you the link to it. But you can hit that, and it'll show every texture image in your entire model, and you can scroll through them, and it shows the pixel size. You can just, at the bottom, type in, well, I want to resize all these to no larger than 1024, and it will do it for you.
Material resizer?
It's Material Resizer. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it's like, we've had that discussion here. It's made by SketchUp. Why they didn't include it, I have no idea, but it's an extension in the extension warehouse.
In the extension.
And